On September 21, 2025, a decision was made in Washington that sent shockwaves through the world. In a move that many have called a betrayal of Africa, the United States suspended all tourism travel from West Africa, affecting millions. The United States, a country known for its open doors and diverse spirit, chose to shut those doors to an entire continent, citing security concerns. But is it really about security? Or is there the travel ban, which directly impacted over 4.3 million people, including students, tourists, and business travelers, was a game-changer in U.S.-Africa relations? People from countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Burkina Faso, who had long considered America a beacon of hope and opportunity, found themselves locked out. Flights were canceled, visas were invalidated, families were torn apart as months of plans were destroyed within minutes. The suddenness of this decision created chaos, not only at airports but also in the hearts of many across Africa. But the true cost of this policy wasn't just felt by the people, but by the political and diplomatic relationships that were strained as a result. But what if there's more to this ban than just security concerns? Is this truly about protecting Americans? Or is it about something much deeper, something that threatens the very sovereignty of African nations? Stay with us as we explore this pivotal moment in history. If you believe that the future of Africa deserves to be heard, click subscribe and join us as we dive into the impact of this ban. On September 21, 2025, Vice President J.D. Vance delivered an announcement that would change the course of U.S.-Africa relations. In a move that stunned the world, Vance declared that the U.S. would suspend all tourism travel from West Africa indefinitely. This decision was quickly followed by President Donald Trump's signature, solidifying the policy into law. With a simple stroke of a pen, millions of visas were suddenly invalidated, and flights from West African hubs like Lagos, Accra, and Dakar to major U.S. cities such as New York, Washington, and Los Angeles were canceled without warning. The immediate consequences were far-reaching. For the 4.3 million people who traveled annually between West Africa and the U.S., this wasn't just a bureaucratic change, it was a devastating disruption. Students, business travelers, and families were left stranded. Families who had long planned reunions were now facing uncertainty. Many of these travelers had saved up for years, anticipating the chance to visit or study in the U.S. For them, this was more than a visa cancellation. It was the closing of a dream. Airports in cities like Lagos, Accra, and Dakar were thrown into chaos. Lines stretched endlessly as passengers, many of whom had already purchased tickets months in advance, found themselves abruptly turned away by airline staff. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a direct blow to the trust that millions of Africans had placed in the United States, a country they had long admired for its promise of opportunity and freedom. But what was the real reason behind this drastic move? The U.S. government justified it by citing national security concerns. But with over 4 million people affected, the question remained: was this truly about safety, or was it a calculated political move? The U.S. government justified its travel ban on West Africa as a necessary response to national security threats. Vice President J.D. Vance emphasized that the ban would prevent potential terrorist threats, claiming that 27% of suspicious security files in the past year were linked to tourist visas. But critics immediately questioned the validity of such a sweeping action. The measure didn't target individuals, but an entire region, potentially punishing millions who had no connection to any threat. The timing of the ban also raised questions. Behind the claim of security concerns, there appeared to be deeper geopolitical motivations. The U.S. government had been closely monitoring China and Russia's growing influence in West Africa. China's Belt and Road Initiative, coupled with its investments in infrastructure and telecoms, especially by Huawei and ZTE, had raised alarm in Washington. The U.S. feared that Africa's growing economic ties with China might jeopardize American interests, particularly in terms of data security. With China controlling a significant portion of Africa's digital infrastructure, U.S. officials worried that sensitive information such as travel and financial data might be vulnerable to foreign influence. Similarly, Russia's increasing presence in West Africa, particularly in countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, posed a direct challenge to U.S. influence. Moscow had secured vital resources like uranium and military alliances, with many of these agreements conducted under the guise of cultural exchanges. The U.S. government believed that some of the tourist delegations from West Africa might have been covert operations funneling support to Russia and Iran. This sentiment intensified the argument that Africa's growing ties with non-Western powers needed to be curtailed, particularly under the guise of cultural diplomacy. The U.S. presented the travel ban as a form of protection, but critics saw it as a strategic move to curb the influence of China, Russia, and Iran in Africa, using security concerns as a pretext for broader geopolitical maneuvering. The response to the ban from Africa was swift and intense. African leaders, particularly those in West Africa, expressed outrage at the U.S. decision. The African Union condemned the ban as a form of collective punishment against millions of innocent citizens. AU Chairperson Moussa Faki Mohammed called the move an unjust attack on Africa, pointing out that it would only deepen the divide between the continent and the West. Nigeria, the region's economic powerhouse, was one of the first to react. President Bola Tinubu warned that if the ban persisted, his country would reconsider vital oil and gas contracts worth over $12 billion annually. Ghana, too, reported a significant financial loss of $420 million due to the sudden invalidation of visas, particularly impacting the tourism sector. In both countries, the ban was seen not only as an economic setback, but as a symbol of disrespect towards Africa. Amid this fury, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso emerged as a powerful voice of defiance. His response to the ban was unwavering. He declared that tourism was a right, not a crime, and if the U.S. shut its doors, Africa would seek alternatives. "Tourism is our right," Traoré said, urging his fellow Africans to stand united in defense of their sovereignty. His words struck a chord not only in Burkina Faso, but across the entire continent. His call for self-determination resonated with millions who felt marginalized by Western policies. Traoré's defiance was not just political, it was deeply symbolic. He positioned himself as a leader, not just for Burkina Faso, but for Africa at large. His stance emphasized that Africa would no longer tolerate being sidelined by the West, particularly in matters of its own development and identity. His message ignited widespread support, leading to protests in cities across West Africa. Citizens rallied around the idea that Africa deserved respect and the freedom to shape its own future. As Traoré's leadership gained momentum, so did the idea that Africa could no longer afford to be beholden to Western powers. His words, "If America shuts its doors, we will open ours," were seen as a challenge to the U.S., and a declaration that Africa was ready to look eastward to forge stronger relationships with countries like China and Russia. The U.S. travel ban, while ostensibly aimed at national security, had immediate and lasting economic consequences. The most significant of these was the impact on the tourism industry. U.S. tourism revenue from West Africa was estimated to be nearly $5 billion annually. The sudden ban disrupted not only tourism, but also broader cultural and educational exchanges. U.S. airlines saw a drop in passengers, particularly on routes to West Africa. Carriers like Delta and American Airlines had to cancel flights, costing them millions in lost revenue. Travel agencies specializing in African tourism were similarly affected, facing a steep decline in bookings. The education sector also felt the sting of the ban. West African students who had long been a crucial part of U.S. universities found their plans shattered. Many universities, particularly those that had long-standing partnerships with African institutions, reported a sharp decline in applications from West African countries. This loss wasn't just financial, it was a blow to academic institutions that valued the diversity and global perspectives these students brought. Perhaps the most significant fallout, however, was the diplomatic isolation that followed. African leaders who had long regarded the U.S. as a key partner were left feeling betrayed. The ban made it clear that Africa was not welcome, not as a partner, not as a friend, but as a threat. The African Union's condemnation and the retaliatory threats from countries like Nigeria and Ghana signaled a shift in Africa's foreign policy. As the U.S. faced criticism for its actions, African nations began to reconsider their relationships with the West. The travel ban, which the U.S. saw as a security measure, was now viewed as a political move that alienated Africa and pushed the continent toward new alliances. Russia and China, two countries with growing influence in Africa, wasted no time in offering alternatives. Russia pledged $3 billion in investments for African tourism infrastructure, while China promised to expand its Belt and Road Initiative, offering billions more in investments for infrastructure development. Traoré's defiance, which initially appeared as a lone stance, quickly grew into a broader movement, one that reflected Africa's shift toward new partners and away from the U.S. The diplomatic isolation of the U.S. in Africa was no longer just a hypothetical, it was happening, and the long-term consequences were beginning to unfold. The U.S. travel ban on West Africa raised significant moral and ethical concerns, especially given the broad nature of the policy. While the U.S. government justified the ban as a necessary step to protect its citizens from potential threats, critics saw it as an overreach, punishing millions of innocent travelers for the actions of a few. Many felt the policy unjustly labeled entire communities as security risks, without concrete evidence linking tourism to terrorism or espionage. For African travelers, the ban represented more than just a disruption of plans. It was a denial of opportunity and human dignity. The U.S. had long been seen as a land of opportunity, where education and family reunification were within reach. Now, with millions of visas invalidated people who had no connection to security threats, found themselves barred from fulfilling their dreams. The ethical implications went beyond personal loss. By blocking cultural exchanges and educational opportunities, the U.S. undermined the values of cooperation and mutual respect that had long defined its relationship with Africa. The ban reinforced harmful stereotypes about Africa and failed to recognize the diverse, vibrant realities of the continent. It sent a message that Africa and its people were to be feared, not embraced. In the end, the ban raised a crucial question. Was the U.S. protecting its citizens, or was it sacrificing its moral authority and its own values in the name of security? In the wake of the U.S. travel ban, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso quickly became a symbol of defiance and leadership. His strong response to the ban resonated deeply across Africa, positioning him as a continental figure who would not bow to foreign pressure. "Tourism is our right, not a crime," Traoré declared, making it clear that Africa would not accept being treated as a threat. His words struck a chord with millions, and his stance became a rallying cry for African sovereignty. Traoré's defiance went beyond politics. It was a call for unity. His leadership highlighted the need for African nations to come together and reclaim their place in the global conversation. Across West Africa, protests erupted in support of Traoré's message. Citizens in cities like Bamako, Accra, and Lagos rallied behind the idea that Africa's dignity and freedom should not be compromised by Western policies. As his popularity grew, so did Africa's determination to reshape its future. Traoré's refusal to accept the ban was not just about Burkina Faso. It was a statement for the entire continent. His advocacy for stronger ties with China and Russia signaled a shift in Africa's foreign policy, showing that Africa no longer had to rely on the West for economic and diplomatic support. In many ways, Traoré's leadership marked the beginning of a new chapter in African independence and self-determination. The U.S. travel ban, while intended to isolate and control, had an unexpected consequence. It ignited a shift in the power dynamics between the West and Africa. As the world reacted, the focus began to move from the ban itself to the leadership of President Ibrahim Traoré. His defiance was not just a political statement, it was a call to action. His bold stance put Africa's sovereignty on display, presenting an opportunity for the continent to rewrite its role in the global order. China and Russia quickly seized the moment. In the days following the ban, Beijing and Moscow announced their intentions to expand their influence in Africa by investing billions in tourism and infrastructure projects. China pledged $3 billion for new airport terminals and digital platforms, while Russia promised direct flight routes, linking African capitals to Eurasia. This was more than just economic support. It was a strategic alliance that aligned Africa with powers that were ready to offer respect, partnership, and investment. Africa was no longer a passive player in the geopolitical game, it was now an active force. For President Traoré, this twist in events only solidified his position as a continental leader. His earlier words that if America shuts its doors, Africa would build bridges elsewhere had not only struck a chord with his own citizens, but also with global powers. By standing firm, Traoré had forced the world to reckon with Africa's rising influence. The travel ban, once seen as a tool for isolating the continent, had inadvertently pushed Africa into the arms of new powerful allies. The consequences of the U.S. travel ban on West Africa were far-reaching, but they also marked a turning point in Africa's journey towards self-determination. The ban, which was intended to isolate the continent, ultimately led to a strengthening of African resolve and unity. President Ibrahim Traoré emerged as the symbol of this new wave of leadership, his defiance becoming a beacon of hope for millions across Africa. His leadership reminded the world that Africa's future would be shaped by Africans, not imposed upon them. In the wake of the ban, Africa's relationships with China and Russia blossomed, offering the continent new avenues for economic growth and diplomatic partnerships. The U.S. may have sought to control Africa's rise, but it inadvertently accelerated it. As Africa's power on the global stage grows, so does the determination to never again be sidelined by foreign powers. I am not asking for freedom. We stand up to claim it. Traoré's words resonate today as Africa continues to chart its own path. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré's defiance touches your heart, share this story. Subscribe to this channel and continue to follow the journey of Africa, a continent no longer willing to bow but ready to rise.